Ready?
Ready.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much. Welcome to the panel, First You March, Then You Run. In celebration of the late Congressman John Lewis's unique journey in becoming a comics creator, we are joined here today by his collaborators on his last book, Run. Co-author Andrew Aydin and as well as artist Nate Powell and artist L. Fury. And we're also joined by John Lewis's son, John Miles Lewis. So I can tell we're all very excited to hear them speak about Run, including the creative process behind it and what it meant to John Lewis, and also speak about how comics can both depict history and change it in uniquely powerful ways. So following the panel, there will be a children's march in tribute to John Lewis and the many marches he led, including children's marches here at San Diego Comic-Con. So we'll leave from here and eventually make our way to the signing at Abrams' booth, which is 1217 on the first floor. Also during the signing at the booth, there will be voter registration happening and voter information given out. So today we'll start with some words from each of our panelists and then follow it up with a Q&A. So start thinking of your questions if you haven't already. And let's begin. So first up is Andrew Aydin.
I wish John Lewis was here with us today. He loved this so much. I'll never forget the first time he came, we really didn't know what to expect. And when we got to the panel room, there was this line. And I remember the congressman going, I wonder who they're here for. Of course, we got into the room and they were here for him. And when it was all over, well, when we got down to the signing, he had a signing line, it was so long, the fire marshal shut it down, and he liked to remind everyone of that fact. But when it was all over, the congressman got to see so many of you, so many young people who came. He said, I feel like I need to dress up. I want to fit in. And that has always stuck with me because growing up, I started going to comic conventions because I felt like an outsider, and it was a place where I felt like I could fit in. It was a community where we all come together to celebrate our love of reading, our love of stories, our love of heroes. And I can't think of a more perfect community for John Lewis to be welcomed into. We face dark times right now. When we finished March Book 3, the congressman and I had a conversation about what to do next. And we kept coming back to the idea that we cannot let people believe that the movement ended or the struggle ended with the signing of the Voting Rights Act. That the pushback, that the forces working against the movement reorganized, doubled down, and struck back. as you read and run, it was just days after the signing of the Voting Rights Act, where John Lewis goes down to Americus, Georgia, and the Klan mounts their largest hooded march in decades. The ink was barely dry on the Voting Rights Act, and the pushback was immediate. We face a moment like that again. But don't let anyone tell you we haven't made progress. Don't let anyone tell you we have not moved forward. As the congressman would have said, come walk in my shoes and I will show you change. That's what March did. It showed you change. To the young people, it gave you a roadmap, a blueprint for how you can change America just like John Lewis did, just like his colleagues did. And we need you. We need you now more than ever. But we come here to Comic-Con to be revived, to get hope, to find comfort in each other. Last night, we won an Eisner Award. I got up there and all I kept thinking is just, don't cry. Don't be that guy. But I kept thinking about the fact that Congressman Lewis so deeply loved that recognition that he kept his Eisner Awards on his mantle until the day he died. This is a man who had countless awards from every manner of institution and organization, every honor you could ask for. But when you saw his mantelpiece, the thing that he saw in the morning, the thing that he saw at night when he got home, was that recognition from Comic-Con, from you, from the creators, saying that he had done something remarkable. That it wasn't just enough to live the life, but as he would say, he bore witness. He told the story. He kept the memory alive. And now that's on us. Now he's no longer with us. But it is our responsibility, each and every one of us, not just myself, not just Nate, not just Fury, not just John Miles, but all of us, to keep his memory alive, to continue to teach these lessons, to show that there is a way in this country to grow up poor, to grow up in rural Alabama, and yet become a part of the fabric, the soul of this nation, and redeem the soul of America. So I'll keep it brief, but I do apologize. I was trained by a Baptist preacher. But I go back to this story over and over again. A story of the 9-year-old. And I got a phone call just before March Book 1 came out. It was a reporter, and he said, I got an advance copy of your book. And I loved it, and I wanted you to know I gave it to my 9-year-old son, and now he's gone and put on his Sunday suit, and he's marching around my house demanding equality for everyone. That's what I need from each of you. I need you to march. And then I need you to run. Because right now, we need public servants. We need people who are willing to step up, carry the load, be a part of the political system. Begin your lives as activists. But remember John Lewis's lessons, that it's not enough just to march. You have to be the public servant that we need. The gift of your labor to your community is the greatest gift that you can give. And right now we need some people who are willing to speak up and speak out, make some noise, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. But then I need you to put your name on a ballot. I don't care if it's school board, county commission, state rep, state senate, or Congress. I believe one of you could even be president of the United States one day. But we need your service. And so let us be reminded of the hope that John Lewis gave us. Let us come here each year, almost like a pilgrimage, and celebrate his life, and do everything we can to tell his story, the human being, not the icon on the picture, in the pictures, but the human being who spent time with us in this place and who you loved. So to paraphrase Dr. King, I'll say it one more time. There is no sound more powerful than the marching feet of a determined people. And I ask you all to join us and march. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Next up will be John Miles, and you can either come up here or stay where you are, as you prefer.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you all for coming out to support everybody for a march and run. Dad loved being here. It blew his mind to see it. He was inadvertently a master of reinventing himself. And he had no idea, from crowd surfing on Stephen Colbert to being here. It was just always funny because he was green to a lot of it, but it just came naturally to him to be that outgoing as well as outspoken. And it's funny, just how Andrew said it, a lot of people look at him as an icon and civil rights leader and just such a major figure, and I just call him Pops. You know, so that was, still miss him to this day. He was very much so a source of inspiration, not as well just for me, but I can also see for all of you all as well, and for the world. And hopefully his teachings and what you saw him do physically and what you saw him bring to the table, along with many others, can help all of us strive to be better people as a whole, as individuals, to be able to come together and make strides and movements and advances for all of us to be more humane, to be more kind to people, to be more civil, to be just love one another and not just replace the hate with nothing but love. And that's what he would have wanted. I remember I'm wearing this shirt. I actually got it this year, just when Dad was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I had the honor to lead that march this year down the Edmund Pettus Bridge with a lot of very prominent people. And I remember when I first started to go, when I was young, it was very hard for me because they would actually play the tape. And they would reenact the smoke, and it was very overwhelming to where it got me angry. And I literally had to stop going and because it was too much. And I had to just rethink about what it was and what my father went through and when you would hear that tape over the loudspeakers while people marched over it, and you hear everything, you hear those sounds that were recorded, the screams and everything, it really puts things in perspective to how far we have come, but we're nowhere near through with what we need to do. And for that, I need and I want everybody to understand how important you are to everybody else in this room, in this world, on this panel, to everybody. And allow yourselves to be that next John Lewis or Coretta Scott King or whoever you want to be. Just be yourselves and make a difference and be excellent. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sean Miles. Up next, we have artist L. Fury.
Hi. I've always wanted to draw comics. I pretty much decided what I wanted to do for a living when I was 14. I did not know it involved public speaking, so sorry ahead of time. Yeah, so I'm a relative newcomer to comics. I mean, of course, I've been drawing them like in my notebooks in school, like when I'm supposed to be paying attention. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like I have a foot in two worlds, and that's like web comics and cartooning and humor, and then a foot in this like serious sequential storytelling world. I never would have imagined I'd be working on this book. But yeah, the beginning of my career, I'd say started around 2015 or something. I quit my day job as I was doing like marketing stuff. And, sorry, what? Oh. I don't know. Okay, so I was doing a lot of just cartooning, silly jokes, post them online, get some likes. But 2016 came around, I started to feel a little jaded, and thinking about what am I doing with my day-to-day life, what kind of impact am I making or not making. And I started to try making more serious comics. And yeah, in 2019 they approached me to do some test pages for the follow-up to March. I was like, excuse me? But it came at such a good time, because it was an opportunity to use my specific skills for something that I really believed in, and I wasn't sure what I could do. I felt a little powerless before. So yeah, I was so honored to work on this. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say, I'm sorry. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Fury. And finally, Nate Powell.
Hey y'all, how's it going? Glad to be back here after so many years, and it never stops being completely overwhelming every time we get here. We're like, oh, 100,000 people, okay. So gang, thanks for being here this morning. I guess one of the things I want to reflect on is I'm a dad, got 2 kids. My older kid was born like the week I signed a contract to start work on March, way back in 2011. And over these past 11 years, it's been so transformative to spend all this time just doing my thing at the table, and feeling so lucky that, since I was 11, what I wanted to do was to tell stories through comics. It was just something that clicked with me immediately. And so, finding something that seemed validating, as well as fun and challenging, and something that I could learn from every day was really important to me. I'm in my mid-40s now, and I'm originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, and so, right on. So, growing up as a kid in the 80s, like a middle-class white kid in Alabama and Arkansas, my parents, who are from Mississippi, I got this basic working, very basic working knowledge of the civil rights movement history from my parents and from the community, I lived in Montgomery at the time. But even as an elementary school kid, there were these things that were setting off these tiny lights in my head that something didn't add up. And a lot of it, I think, had to do with the baggage my parents and their generation hadn't really dealt with yet by the 1980s, as far as being kids coming of age at the end of legalized segregation throughout their home state as kids in the 1950s and 1960s. And a lot of the history they would tell me would always come with a little bit of this disclaimer where, I'd get some history, get some information, but they would always be like, oh yeah, but that was a long time ago. That has nothing to do with where we are now. It's like this gulf of history. And the older I get now, it occurs to me that what they were talking about was memories and experiences in history that were 10 to 15 years before I was born. And that is nothing. And now that, I've spent over 10 years as a dad, it's really incredible to kind of try to focus on how that history can be reintroduced to my kids, how to not make some of the same mistakes that my parents and their generation made. Even though some of those mistakes are very well intended, that's not gonna do a whole lot of good when we're sort of rising to the challenges of our world and of our democracy and of our society. So my older kids, they're going into 5th grade right now, and as for all y'all who have been in school the past 2 years, it has not been an easy ride. And so, number one, I want to give a round of applause to each of you who has been in school and weathered the last 2.5 years of trying to make it work, trying to figure out ways to keep on staying focused, keeping your friend groups, looking out for each other, helping your teachers out whenever possible who have had such a difficult time throughout this. Thank you for being you. My older kid, the last year and a half in particular, has been dealing with a lot of mean girl problems that have really instituted themselves. And I feel like my path as a parent is parallel to my path working on March and working on Run and working on bringing John Lewis's memories and experiences back out into the world. It's when my kid was 4, that's when she first requested to read March, the John Lewis story. And thanks to Mick here, thanks to hearing Mick talk about how he's oh yeah, 3rd and 4th graders in my classes, here's this method that has been working for me to sort of chop up March Book 1 into a couple of weeks worth of classes and how much to tackle at one time, how to talk about it, how to ask questions, how to curate that reading experience for young people. I took that to heart and that changed my life as a dad. So thank you, Mick. So thanks to him. Thanks to him, I was able to kind of dive into this history and dive into this really important information when my kid was starting at 4 and 5 years old. And each time we would read through, things would get more complex and bring in more of the world that they knew around them. it has really fundamentally shaped my kids' outlook on life and what their role is in their community, in their schools, in the world at large. So yeah, my now 10-year-old, has started, basically has started a website of local resources, that's called Change, Peace, Hope, Happiness, and basically compiles stuff to help, to help assist with people who are experiencing homelessness in our community, addiction issues, disability and veterans programs that are localized, food resources, vaccination and health resources for our community. But a lot of that is just that, I'm not sure how many people click on the website, but basically the point is that you're recognizing what you can do under your own power. My kid Harper is really motivated by this idea of I want to do something. I want to be able to take my energy and do something to change the world around me. And so it was kind of my job to really hear that and be okay, what can we do at your level? What do you care about? And write a list and be okay, now for each one of these things, here's a way we can get information out to people who are curious about it. Here's a way that maybe we could raise money to donate to people who are already doing this really hard work. And a lot of that has kind of springboarded. So going into problems with bullying and mean girl problems that have really kicked in in 4th grade. A lot of that applies the same principles. It really comes back to our work through March and through Run, recognizing where's this line between having discipline, having self-control, being able to brush things aside, but also recognizing that you need to stand up for yourself and look out for and stand up for the people around you, even if that means more heat comes your way, even if that means that, that more conversations have to be had, even the uncomfortable parts are what are going to fix some of these problems. This is, this is the kind of thing where it's been fantastic that through these books, I got to help create these books, but I also get to enjoy them as a reader and as a parent and see every single day how they can be applied in my kids' lives. And my older kid is over halfway to being an adult now and is looking forward to running for student council next year and is counting down how many years until she can vote. And it's just one of those things that's in one of those, the personal is the political ways. You can really see how the changes that happen in a young person's life, within their neighborhood, within their school, within their community, you see that ripple effect that can help change a town, change a society. So it's just been my honor on many levels, creatively and as a parent, to be able to spend so much of my life just neck deep in John Lewis's story, his inspiration, and the many ways he's impacted me as I try to do the best job I can to bring more young people up into the world to actually be able to turn things around and give us a fighting chance at a society that works and looks out for each other. So thanks for anything that each of you can do on any of those levels, because addressing power and control and inequality works on these huge levels, nationwide, worldwide, but it functions on these really small levels too. And that's why Congressman Lewis was always very plain, when you see something that is not fair, that is not right, that is not just, you have a duty to stand up, to speak up and speak out. That's something that we need to apply every single day, both on the huge worldly level, but also in terms of how we interact with everyone around us. So that's about that for me. Let's open it up. Right?
Thanks so much, Nate. Now we'll move to the Q&A portion. So there's a microphone right here. If you have any questions, please come up to the microphone and just please be brief with your question if you can, and if we don't get to you, there'll also be the signing.
Well, mine's very brief. When is the next book coming out?
Thank you for getting right to the most difficult question. In the process of making this book, I would slip these pages from Fury and Nate under the congressman's door, because a lot of this happened as the pandemic broke out. He would call me, and then he would put his notes, he would hide it behind the planter in front of his house. It gave him a lot of joy in those last weeks and months. But finishing it, putting that book to bed after he passed, was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, and I think we all felt that way. And honestly, I don't have an answer for you, because it's an incredibly difficult creative process. And part of what sustained us was John Lewis and his spirit, his encouragement. And even here today, I love you all. But it's very difficult to do this without him, because we've got to see his joy. We got to feed that joy. And, I just, there is no answer to that. I don't know. So thank you for, it was really stern with that. Yeah, can some of the kids, I would really love to hear from some of the young people.
How did you feel when you, this is to John Miles Lewis, how did you feel when you learned your father was going to write the book?
We'll say that again?
How did you feel when you learned your father was going to write the book or had written the book?
I was excited. It was actually funny to me because he kept calling it like a comic and not being a graphic novel. And it was funny, like, John Miles, I'm about to do a comic book. And it was just, you see his eyes lit up. He was like, hey, I'm about to do a comic book. I'm like, okay, what's it gonna be? I don't know, it's gonna be the newspaper, I don't know, but we're gonna do one. And so he was just so happy. He had a great time writing it with everybody. And I was happy for him. It was a while when you're dealing with the world's problems and the nation's problems. I think it was actually an outlet for him to just, even going through some of the most painful times of his life dealing with this book, it did bring him joy to see it in a whole different manner, and a way that reached out to young people in a way that, from everything that the people have read about him, never has. So I think it was extremely fun to watch him go through the whole creative process, and he enjoyed it a lot, and I enjoyed watching him and seeing how much he loved doing it.
Hi, so my question is basically reading March and Run. I just was really wowed by how much hope I felt while reading those stories, despite how painful some of those moments were. And as a teacher, I'm always trying to figure out how to inspire my students to feel empowered and to feel like they can do something. I guess my question is, how did you find that hope in those stories? How were you able to, I think through some of the art in these stories, and of course just like the way everything is presented, what advice would you have for someone like me?
I'd say on one of the most fundamental levels, looking back, this is something I actually wish that I could do a little better, was drawing the March books, recognizing just the sheer youth of young John Lewis, young Diane Nash, Bernard Lafayette, all these 18 to 22-year-olds, and being able to, as I'm reading and relearning this information, as I'm putting this art on the page, being like, oh, these are 20-year-olds. These are, like we learned all this stuff about, the challenges and the terror and the example from the 1961 Freedom Rides. But to me, like what has seemed really important to drive home to my kids and to kind of point out in moments like this is I remember as John Lewis is catching a ride to a rural bus stop to get on the Freedom Rides, he and all his friends overslept. And so at the beginning of March Book 2, they're like racing through the backwoods to make it to this like fork in the road to hop on a bus to eventually get to a Greyhound station. And they're all just cracking jokes about, having to like forge their parents' signatures to like get permission to go, and sleeping through the revolution if they stayed up too late or they're tired, and just like recognizing that these like when we say these are young people who changed America for the better, these are young people who changed our society. I mean, these are young people, and it's like when we used to do talks together all the time, I would always end it with this idea that when you read this history and when you read Congressman Lewis's memories of it, like the big takeaway is here's what this thoughtful, committed group of young people did to change our society, but not despite being just 20 years old, because they were 20 years old. And so I kind of pose that as a challenge. Like when I think about what I was doing when I was 20, I'm like, okay, all right, I'll reassess, where I was and what my ideals were and what I really wanted to do with the world. But my challenge is, what will you do when you are 20? And the joy is you get to decide that. But I'd say like that brings me the greatest sense of like sort of overcoming a lot of the dread and a lot of the sense of just the sheer amount of obstacles we sometimes have in society, is recognizing the absolute youth of the people within the pages of these books that you're reading about.
Hi, my question is, I imagine how hard writing the book is, but how many times did you feel like you were going to give up, just in general?
I can answer that a lot, almost every day. Yeah, it was really hard. I kind of, I had some major imposter syndrome following in Nate's footsteps. And on top of that, 2020 was the bulk of my year was working on this, and that was just a hard year for everybody, but I didn't give up. When you're drawing John Lewis's story, you really don't want to. You can quickly get over that urge to quit. You're like, no, I gotta do this. But yeah, short answer, every day.
Thank you. My question is, do you want my job?
Yes.
How do you think that the graphic novel medium sort of made the message of the book, or like the power stronger, or like, I don't know, better?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Go for it. You want to go first?
Well, I was going to say in general, it was always in the comics format from day one for specifically like the unique strengths of comics. But in terms of like this history, making it real and making it, really hit us as readers, including like going back to like I'm drawing it at the drawing table, but I'm also learning and relearning this stuff as I go. It's blowing my mind every day. I'm throwing out incorrect ideas and assumptions that I grew up with. Like, a lot of it was like reckoning that, yeah, like you're always asking questions about what you learned growing up and the way that our understanding of everything changes as we grow. And so with the power of comics, it allows us to kind of get past the historical component and actually feel what is happening to the real people who are and were experiencing it. And I think that allows you to arrive at a place where so much of this is about people working together and working past fear and dread and terror and feeling hopeless. And even doing like the boring work of activism, the boring work of the movement, and recognizing that there's room for all of this, and there's room for lightness throughout this account of history. And I think that the visual component of comics allows you to actually feel the humanity of these historical people involved without judgment, and allows you to sort of apply where you've been in your life and constantly just sort of be assessing a lot of different things happening at the same time as you're reading and as you're feeling. And I feel like that's the unique power of comics, is the way empathy works and the way you just project yourself into the characters involved, especially when those characters are real human beings.
Can I just, speaking to like the power of just like visuals generally, please fact check me if I'm wrong, because like I said, I was drawing during history class. But the Voting Rights Act was passed in part because of the images people saw on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the brutality, and that really, images just stick with people. So yeah, just it forces people to see the suffering when they can actually see it, more so than like a statistic or
Good point. Yeah, well, Congressman put it this way. He said it makes it real, it makes it plain. And I think there's a long history of the civil rights movement using comics to affect change. Whether it was Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story, as we talked about in March, or the Lowndes County Freedom Organization comics that they used in 1966 that we talk about in Run, or later Julian Bond using his own Vietnam comic to explain his opposition to the Vietnam War. There is a historic pedigree. They figured it out first. But one of the challenges they face is that comics weren't accepted like they are today. We didn't have the opportunity to do graphic memoirs. They didn't have that word even back then. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that y'all are growing up on the internet. You're digital natives. The digital language is essentially a sequential narrative. It's words and pictures working together. And so we seized a moment of change in the fundamental way in which we communicate with each other. And that allowed us to bring John Lewis's story in a way that seemingly shocked people. I mean, I remember the early covers, they would be like, it was almost as if they were surprised that these books were succeeding despite the fact that they were comics. But in fact, they were succeeding explicitly because they were comics. And I think when we look at how we teach each other about our history, about so many facts, this is the future. This is how we do it. You can learn more quickly through comics, through sequential narrative. And I think we've got to take a long, hard look as an industry, as creators, to make sure that it's not just John Lewis's story that we're lifting up. The John Lewis we celebrate today was not the John Lewis who first heard the idea that he should write a comic book in 2008. This helped lift him up and his story up and his colleagues up. So who else is out there? Who else deserves to have their story lifted up, to bring their passion, their lessons to all of us? Comics are the future. And we need to recognize that, and you all do.
Thank you.
So at Reading March, it was really interesting to experience kind of that whole everything that happened that we've learned about. It was really cool to experience it through someone who went through it. So my question for you is, what was it like to hear his story and illustrate and write the story of after hearing it from him who lived through it, from John Lewis?
Okay.
It was really intense at times, frankly. A lot of it is, like I was saying earlier, constantly comparing the way I was taught some of this history as a kid 35 years ago compared to the way that I was relearning it and the way that I was, basically using my visual skills to actually place it in real space and to sort of walk through it in my imagination. Like, so much of the work of being at the drawing table really is walking around in your imagination. It's like, it's hard to put into eloquent words, but that's what it is. And that can trigger a lot of really strong feelings. And there's a lot, the hope and the joy and everything, but a lot of disgust and a lot of horror in those moments. And it's really important to take notice when you feel uncomfortable. When you're reading or when you're reading this information, when you're absorbing it, or when you feel disgusted, when you feel horrified, as much as when you feel inspired, because those moments of feeling angry and horrified and disgusted and concerned, that's what pushes us to really figure out what those next steps are to prevent this level of oppression and inequality from returning. And we are in the middle of a very organized push to kind of roll the clock back 50 years. That's really...
Thanks so much. We just have a few minutes left, so let's just work through the people who are in line for these last few questions. Thank you.
For you two who are the artists, how long did it take to finalize your sketches for the final cut?
Ooh, I love your Demon Slayer.
Thanks.
I don't know, it's so long. In the beginning when I felt like I had endless amount of time, I would spend like 7 hours on a sketch, and then towards the end I was just like blazing through these pages, and oddly they looked better when I went faster. But it is, if you want to get into comics, it's extremely time consuming, so you have to be very good at sitting still for long periods of time.
That's a good point. Like what Fury is describing here is like getting in the flow, where we've got deadlines, we've got to finish this book on time, but a lot of like working on a long book like this is, you see each panel as an individual piece of art, but also each page might be 5 panels and it's 5 pieces of art, but also just one piece of art, the page, and the entire book might be 1,000 individual drawings, but it's also just one piece of art. So it's like you start out slow, you're ramping up, and you're kind of figuring out your own kind of shorthand for how you want to put it on the page. And eventually, you start to get in this flow state where you're spending less time, and yes, you're running out of time. So like you're like, okay, done is better than perfect. But you're also getting in this kind of smooth state where all of a sudden you're like, now something's happening on the page. So I spend about 5 hours per page, and then I also get into these crunch time moments where I'm like, uh-oh, I've got 10 pages to do this week. Yeah. It's figuring out how to make it work so that your work is actually complete and looks kind of consistent across the board.
So when you were working on the book, you obviously gained a very intimate knowledge of John Lewis's life and his experiences. And was there ever a moment where you learned something that happened to him, or that he saw or experienced that you hadn't heard before, and you were just like, wow, like you were very surprised or just shocked that that happened? Because in reading the book, you can certainly feel those moments where you're just like shocked that that happened.
yeah, and like horrified and disgusted. I like Nate, this was kind of a re-education in Black history for me. And what was really cool was just Andrew and the congressman got into more global politics and his stance on Vietnam and apartheid in South Africa. I think it wasn't like shocking, but it was kind of cool to hear about his opinions on international politics.
That is a good point. I feel like I'm just speaking for my generation, but in general, learning the history of the civil rights movement in America, that's a huge chunk of history, and so you have to limit things. But I feel like I grew up with a sense that this was something that started and stopped within the United States of America. Especially once you get past 1964 and 65, the ideas in which anti-Black racism were happening in different ways and in different dimensions across the world, and the fact that struggles to free and provide equality and resources for people are not limited by borders, and to recognize that everyone's struggles are interconnected. So I feel like reading through the material and putting it on the page, that was just like revelation after revelation, seeing the ways in which all people and their struggles are connected across the globe.
I'll just add the part that John Miles and I talked about this, right? Where sometimes you get to know these very personal connections between public figures that you think of, right? And we have this tendency to flatten those relationships and be like, oh, they're all of the same era, same generation, they stood for the same, or they fought for the same issues, so they all got along and they all agreed. And they didn't at all, right? Like the one that I remember struck me, I'll do the one that's like very public, because there's some others. The one that always struck me was Thurgood Marshall, right? And I remember that story when, Congressman starts telling about how he met Thurgood Marshall before he was, justice. He was a lawyer, right? And Marshall says to the congressman, stop getting arrested, essentially, stop getting arrested, stop getting beaten. What are you doing? Just give me one good court case. You're gonna get yourself killed. Don't do that, stop. And the congressman says, sir, I'm not trying to change a law, I'm trying to create a revolution. I'm trying to create a movement. That, right? That's what your generation needs to know. We see these conflicts between leaders, and they put it out on television, they put it in the press, and they're like, oh, there's discord, there's this, that, and the other. Disagreements, these sort of philosophical disagreements, they are inevitable in a successful movement. And it's the young people who have to keep pushing the older generation. So those sort of stories, they meant a lot. And I hope you keep those in mind too, as you mount your own efforts.
Yeah, thank you.
My question is for the illustrators. My question is, how did you feel when you were creating some of the more dramatic scenes in all the books?
There were moments where I definitely had stop for the day and go pet my cat and go take a walk or whatever. A lot of times it had to do with just reminding myself that I had a job to do, and my job was telling this history through John Lewis's eyes and in his words, and recognizing that it's important to recognize the feelings that I was experiencing on the page, but that it wasn't about me. And so a lot of it was finding ways, whether it's doing Jedi mind tricks on myself, or giving myself treats and rewards for getting through a really difficult page or something. Those are parts of my workday that really helped me get the job done on more intense, difficult sections. and really helped remind me that ultimately, like, you know, it's important to recognize those feelings, but it's also not about me. It's about bringing all of this to light through the page.
I think in focusing on the subject, who you're drawing, I just, you know, I spent all day drawing their face, studying their face from different angles, and it was tough, and I had to take some dog petting breaks. But it just, I don't know, I just felt like I owed it to them to spend that time and take that time to portray it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists. All right, for anyone who wants to join our children's march, we are going to be lining up right here, right now, and leaving through that door. Children and panelists in front, and we will be snappy. Matt,
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.